Now let's look at Cowork, which is where Claude can do something that takes more time and can do a bit more complex task autonomously. So for Bright Futures, every quarter someone is pulling they're spending a lot of time to put together this donor report, right? Let's have Claude Cowork do it for them. We'll start with what the donor actually asks for. You're looking at an assumed quarterly progress report. Let's say this is a template that was shared to Bright Futures by a donor such as FCDO. It might have 9 cover page fields, 8 sections, some annexes, and so on. If you look at this section 3, there's a financial table. So let's assume that FCDO wants 5 columns, total budget spent to date, this quarter remaining, so on, broken down by budget line. They also want variance explanations for anything over 10% and 50,000 pounds. And then when you look at section 2, they're also asking for log frame progress. So 1 block per output, RAG status, narrative, challenges, actions, and so on. They might also have included some annexes in the template. For example, this Annex A over here is a full indicator tracking table that they want. So maybe 1 row per indicator. So every single one of these cells needs to be populated from 2 different systems, Salesforce for the programmatic side and Business Central for financials. And that's what Cowork will do. For Bright Futures, of course, it's Salesforce and Business Central, but it's the same capability for the program management and ERP tool that your organization might be using. So let's see, this is the Skills Academy that they are tracking in Salesforce. This is where the program team manages everything. So partners, indicators, results, risks, work plan. If you notice the fields at the top, there's a project name, status, implementation, start and end dates, funding amount. All of this will go straight onto the cover page of the report. And because this is also where Bright Futures does the entire project setup, it will also include information around implementing partners. For example, Banda Foundation in South Africa, or perhaps a few local partners in Brazil and Kenya, as well as funders such as FCDO and Acro Foundation, which is a co-funder. So Cowork reads this list and populates the implementing organization field on the cover page of that report, and it builds the partner financial table as well. They also use Salesforce to track their outcomes, outputs, and indicator results. So here we can see we have the outcomes, but also we can see in the results tab, the results for different indicators for Q1. This one is specifically for Brazil, but you will probably have information captured for all the geographies where I work. So now Salesforce is also being used to track the risks. So I have identified a few risks over here, and perhaps Kenyan shilling depreciation is marked as really high risk, and it probably needs attention from FCTO. It should be flagged in that report that I want. Now we are looking at a Business Central instance for Bright Futures, and this is where half of the information of my report comes from, where my actual expenditures are living, and where my project dimensions and Skills Academy project is sitting. So let's maybe look at a few invoices and see how that translates into the report. For example, 108042, this is an invoice for Banda Foundation for USD 10,000, and it's dated for 21st March. Now, this is a partner disbursement. So Cowork picks this up, converts it into GBP at the period average rate, and then this becomes the disbursed to date figure for Banda Foundation in the section 3.4 of the report. So the amount that we're seeing of £8,000, we know is the actual that was spent. Now let's look at 108075. This is an expense for John Bond, which is it's a consulting invoice for a GL account of 68140. And here it gets interesting. Cowork noticed that GL 68140 has no corresponding planned expense in Salesforce. And that's a data quality issue that would normally get caught maybe at final review. Now, Cowork will flag this automatically in the variance section report, in the variance section of the report, and so that it flags for the finance team that this needs attention before you submit it. So now I can see a list of all the line items, including 108075, and finance team knows what to look at. Let's look at maybe 2 more. So 108043 and 108044. These are expenses that we actually incurred in Q1. So airfare in February, office rent in February, but in my accounting system, they were only posted in April. So if you run a report purely on posting dates as a cash basis report would, these costs would disappear. Now, FCDO accepts accrual basis reporting, so Cowork includes them. And the report, when I go back to the section of the report where I have all of this summarized, it correctly shows the number 62,640 pounds and not 48,800 pounds, which you would have seen if it was on a cash basis. And that's a difference of 13,840, which is otherwise that would need a lot of manual adjustment in Q2 for you to catch that. So how does Cowork actually do all of this? You talk to it like a colleague. You say, hey, draft the FCDO quarterly donor report for Q1 for this Project Skills Academy. You perhaps give the code in Business Central, and then Cowork activates a donor report skill. It's a pre-built workflow that knows the FCDO template structure. It knows Salesforce API and the Business Central API. It first resolves the project, queries Salesforce, finds Skills Academy, and confirms the Q1 2026 reporting period exists. It might also ask you to confirm before it does anything. But once it has confirmed, it runs through all the different phases that's defined in the skill. So in this instance, it's pulling organization roles, indicators, results, risks, and work plan from Salesforce. And it's also pulling general ledger entries and purchase invoices from Business Central. And then it's running a validation script that checks every budget line for variance breaches and every indicator for missing results. So this validation is actually clean. There is zero error, and the three warnings or the few warnings that we are seeing, they're all expected. So office and overheads variance, the GL 68140 mapping issue that we saw earlier, narrative section needing an additional partner, all of that is flagged, but everything else is populated and ready. And what we are now seeing is the final output. So let's actually trace a few data points from the source to report. This cover page has the reporting period, Q1 2026, which comes from Salesforce. My project code of FCDO EDU 2527 comes from Business Central. If I scroll down to section 1.2, we can see a few key highlights. I'm sorry. For example, we see 886 as youth completing a vocational module. This number 886 is actually a sum of all of the individual results that come from Salesforce, and it's aggregated across Kenya, South Africa, India, and so on. So Cowork did that arithmetic. Now, if we look at the financial table in section 3.1, this is also where the total budget of 112,000 is actually coming from Salesforce's financial line items, but the actual expenses are spent to date. That's coming from Business Central. So this 8480 is actually an expense that was made for my airfare vendor as well as for a domestic travel by one of my employees. And then section 3.4 as well shows partner disbursement. So Panda Foundation, we agreed a budget of £16,800, but we can see that so far we have disbursed £8,000 from Business Central. And this link of what was planned in Salesforce and what's the actual in Business Central, this is made automatically by Cowork. And Cowork is also quite explicit about what it can't do. So every section where human input is required is also clearly marked. And these aren't really gaps. They are more verification and review that the program team should do. So then the system handles the data assembly and your team handles the context and the judgment. So when you see needs, input, and points like that, those are your markers as your checklist for submission. So now we see that a report that could have taken 3 to 4 days now just takes one conversation and a review. Your data is live. It's pulled from Salesforce and Business Central, and you can draft based on actual numbers.